The city park buzzed with the laughter of children and the hum of everyday life, a peaceful oasis amidst the chaos of the city. But suddenly, a sharp cry cut through the air, turning heads and freezing the atmosphere. Darnell, sitting alone beneath the shade of an old oak tree, felt his pulse quicken. His eyes darted to the playground where a group of boys had surrounded a smaller, pale child. The scene played out like a nightmare he had witnessed too many times before. A lone child, frightened, clutching his backpack as bullies closed in. Darnell's hands tightened into fists, his knuckles white against his weathered skin. Memories flooded back, vivid and raw. He saw himself as a boy, facing similar torment, hearing the same cruel laughter. Back then, he had no one to stand up for him. Today, he had a choice. He could stay hidden in the shadows or intervene. The leader of the bullies, tall and sneering, shoved the small boy hard. "You think you're better than us because your dad's got money?" he taunted, his voice dripping with disdain as his friends egged him on. The boy stumbled, fear painted across his face. For a moment, Darnell hesitated. He had learned to avoid trouble. Life on the streets had taught him that much. But something inside him snapped, an instinct, a deep-rooted sense of justice that refused to stay silent. Before he realized what he was doing, Darnell was on his feet, his voice booming across the playground. "Hey, leave him alone." The boys turned, startled. The leader's eyes met Darnell's, the bravado fading as he faced the man's intense, unwavering stare. "What's your problem, old man?" he retorted, but his voice lacked the confidence it held moments before. Darnell stepped forward, his gaze like steel. "I said, leave him alone," he repeated, the quiet authority in his voice making the boys pause. The leader's sneer faltered, and after a tense moment, he muttered to his friends, "Let's go. This isn't worth it." As the boys retreated, Darnell felt the adrenaline coursing through him. He walked over to the young boy, who was still shaking, his eyes wide and teary. "You all right, kid?" Darnell asked, his tone softening as he knelt beside him. The boy nodded, his hands gripping his backpack as if it were the only thing grounding him. "Thank you," he whispered. "I didn't know what to do." Darnell forced a smile, trying to mask the turmoil inside him. "You don't have to thank me. They're just bullies, no real power." He reached out, dusting off the boy's jacket. "What's your name?" "Eli," the boy answered, his voice small but steadying. "Darnell," he replied with a nod. "Eli, you shouldn't be out here alone. Where's your family?" Eli glanced around nervously. "My dad's coming to pick me up. He's just busy." Darnell noted the boy's expensive shoes, the high-end backpack slung over his shoulders. This kid came from a different world, one filled with privileges Darnell hadn't known in years, if ever. But that didn't matter now. "All right," Darnell said, offering a reassuring smile. "How about I wait with you until he gets here?" Eli's eyes brightened, and he nodded. Together, they walked to a bench, and as they sat, the tension slowly faded. Darnell kept his eyes on the park's entrance, the echoes of his own past still lingering in his mind. He had once been like Eli, innocent, hopeful, and unaware of the harsh realities that awaited. The minutes dragged, and the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows. Finally, a sleek black car pulled up, and Eli's face lit up with relief. He jumped up, running toward the vehicle. Darnell rose slowly, watching as a tall, white man in a sharp suit stepped out. His eyes softened when he saw Eli, but when they shifted to Darnell, they hardened, calculating, guarded. "Dad, this is Darnell. He helped me when some boys were picking on me," Eli explained, his voice full of gratitude and trust. The man's polite smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for helping my son," he said, extending a hand. The tone was civil but distant, like a barrier erected between them. Darnell accepted the handshake, feeling the cool detachment. "Just glad he's safe," Darnell responded, his voice even. Their eyes met, and Darnell felt the unspoken judgment, a clash of two worlds that had briefly crossed. As Eli and his father drove away, Darnell stood there, watching the car fade into the distance. The loneliness, like a shadow, crept back into his heart. Returning to his tree, Darnell pulled his coat tighter around him, the chill of the evening wind seeping through the fabric. But something was different. Despite the familiar ache of isolation, there was a small warmth, a spark of purpose. For a brief moment, he had mattered. He had done something good. In the days that followed, Darnell couldn't shake the memory of Eli. The kid reminded him of his younger self, a boy caught between worlds, trying to find his way. He found himself returning to the park, scanning the playground, hoping to see Eli again. And then, one afternoon, he did. Eli was alone again, sitting on the swings, kicking at the dirt. When he spotted Darnell, a grin spread across his face, and he ran over, clutching his backpack. "Can I sit with you?" he asked, his eyes hopeful. Darnell raised an eyebrow. "Shouldn't you be with your dad?" Eli shrugged. "He had to take a call. He'll be back." Darnell could see the loneliness in the boy's eyes, a loneliness that mirrored his own. He patted the bench beside him. "Sure, kid. Take a seat." They sat together, the silence between them filled with unspoken thoughts. Eli glanced up at Darnell, his face curious. "Why did you help me?" The question caught Darnell off guard. He wasn't used to explaining himself, especially not to a child. But there was something about Eli's innocence that made him want to be honest. "Because you needed it," he said, his voice soft. "Sometimes it's enough to just be there for someone, even if you don't know them." Eli thought about this for a moment. "But you don't have any kids. How come?" Darnell's smile faded, his eyes clouding with the weight of his past. The memories of lost dreams, broken promises, and the family he never had flashed before him. "Life didn't turn out that way for me," he replied, hoping the answer would be enough. Eli's gaze softened, as if he understood more than Darnell expected. "I get lonely too," he said quietly. "My dad's always busy. I don't get to see him much." Darnell felt the pang of empathy deepen. "He cares about you, though. You can tell just by how fast he showed up that day." Eli smiled, but the sadness lingered. "Yeah, I know, but I wish he wasn't so busy." Darnell reached out and gave Eli's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You're a strong kid, Eli. Don't ever forget that." The boy's eyes brightened for a moment, and they sat in silence, the bond between them growing. For Darnell, it was a reminder that even in a world that had taken so much from him, he still had the power to give something back. It was a small step, but it felt like a start, like the beginning of something that could bring meaning back into his life. Darnell and Eli's newfound bond became a rhythm in the park's life. Every few days, Darnell would see Eli, and they'd share the bench beneath the old oak tree, the unspoken understanding between them deepening with each visit. Eli seemed to crave these moments, moments away from the expectations and distance his father's world placed upon him. For Darnell, these encounters were like a lifeline, a reminder that despite his broken past, he could still be something good for someone. One day, as they sat together, Eli, swinging his feet absent-mindedly, suddenly looked up at Darnell with a gleam in his eyes. "Darnell, do you ever miss having a family?" The question was like a punch to Darnell's chest, and he had to swallow back the emotions that threatened to rise. He managed a small smile. "Yeah, kid, I do. I thought I'd have one once, but life doesn't always go the way you plan." Eli's face scrunched up in confusion. "What happened?" Darnell hesitated. He didn't want to unload his pain on a child. "Let's just say, sometimes you make choices you think are right, but they end up being the wrong ones, and by the time you realize, it's too late." Eli's eyes were full of curiosity and compassion. "Is that why you live in the park?" Darnell chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." He paused, then added, "But it's not all bad. Sometimes, you meet people who make it worth it." He glanced at Eli with a meaningful look, and the boy beamed, his face lighting up. But as the days went on, Darnell noticed Eli's visits growing shorter, his smiles fading quicker. One afternoon, when Darnell spotted him near the swings, Eli's usual excitement was replaced by a troubled frown. "What's wrong, kid?" Darnell asked as Eli sat down beside him. Eli hesitated, kicking at the dirt. "Dad's been even busier lately. He doesn't like me coming to the park alone anymore. He says it's not safe." Darnell felt a pang of guilt. He knew Eli's father didn't trust him, saw him as nothing more than a homeless man, a potential danger. "Your dad just wants to protect you, that's all. But he doesn't understand." Eli burst out, his voice tinged with frustration. "I like coming here. I like being with you." Darnell's heart ached. He wanted to say that everything would be fine, that they'd always have their time together, but he knew better. The world Eli's father inhabited was one of rules and barriers, one that would never accept a man like Darnell as part of his son's life. "Hey, we'll figure it out, okay?" he said, ruffling Eli's hair. "No matter what, you'll always have a friend in me." Eli smiled. but the sadness remained in his eyes. As he left with a reluctant wave, Darnell watched, feeling the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. A few days later, as Darnell made his usual walk through the park, he was surprised to find Eli sitting alone on the bench, his face streaked with tears. The sight made Darnell's heart drop. He hurried over, his voice filled with concern. "Eli, what happened?" Eli looked up, his eyes red and puffy. "Dad said I can't come here anymore. He doesn't like that I'm spending time with you." Darnell's chest tightened. He had known this was coming, but hearing it from Eli's own mouth made it all the more painful. "I get it, Eli," he said softly. "Your dad's just looking out for you." "But you're not dangerous," Eli cried, his voice breaking. "You're my friend." Darnell had to look away, blinking back his own emotions. "I know, kid, but sometimes people see what they want to see. They don't always understand." Eli sniffled, wiping at his tears. "It's not fair." "No, it's not," Darnell agreed, his voice thick. "But you've got a good dad, one who loves you. That's more important than anything." Eli was quiet for a moment, then he suddenly wrapped his arms around Darnell, burying his face in his coat. The gesture caught Darnell off guard, and he froze, unsure of how to react. Slowly, he lifted his arms and hugged the boy back, feeling the warmth of the connection they had built. As they pulled apart, Eli looked up at him with determination. "I'll find a way. I promise." Darnell smiled, though it was bittersweet. "You're a brave kid, Eli." That night, Darnell stayed at the park long after the sun had set. He thought about his own childhood, the loneliness he had felt when no one was there for him. But now he realized he was no longer that same scared boy. He had become someone who could stand up, who could be a friend when it mattered most. Weeks passed, and Darnell's life continued as it always had, but he felt the absence of Eli keenly. The bench where they used to sit seemed emptier, and every time he passed the swings, he half expected to see Eli running toward him, backpack bouncing. But the boy never came. One evening, as Darnell was preparing to settle down beneath his tree, a voice called out from behind him. "Darnell!" He turned to see Eli, grinning from ear to ear, running across the park with a familiar energy. Darnell's heart leaped, but his relief was quickly overshadowed by concern. "Eli, what are you doing here? I thought your dad said." I know, Eli said, panting as he reached Darnell. "But he's busy again. He had to work late, so I came." Darnell's face softened. "You shouldn't be out here alone." Eli's smile faded, and he looked down. "I know, but I missed you." Those 3 words hit Darnell harder than he expected, and he had to take a deep breath to steady himself. "I missed you too, kid." They spent the evening together, talking and laughing like old times. Darnell told Eli stories about his childhood, funny ones that made Eli's eyes widen in amazement and laughter bubble up. For a few hours, it was like nothing had changed. But as the sky darkened and the park grew quieter, Darnell knew it was time for Eli to go. "Come on, I'll walk you to the edge of the park," Darnell said. "It's getting late." As they neared the exit, Eli stopped, turning to Darnell with a serious expression. "Do you think we'll still be friends when I grow up?" Darnell's throat tightened, and he crouched down to look Eli in the eyes. "Eli, no matter where life takes you, you'll always be my friend. That's a promise." Eli's face lit up, and he threw his arms around Darnell one last time before running off, waving as he disappeared into the distance. The next day, something felt different. Darnell wandered through the park as usual, but there was a heaviness in the air that he couldn't shake. He reached the bench where he and Eli always sat and waited, hoping against hope that the boy would show up again. But the hours ticked by, and the sun sank low. Darnell's unease grew. Just as he was about to leave, he spotted a familiar car pulling up at the park's edge. It was Eli's father, stepping out with a look of urgency on his face. Darnell's heart raced as the man approached him, his expression a mix of worry and frustration. "Have you seen Eli?" he asked, his voice strained. "He didn't come home last night." Darnell's stomach dropped. "No, I haven't seen him." Panic flashed across his face, and he quickly scanned the park, but there was no sign of the boy. Eli's father's eyes hardened, his voice laced with accusation. "If you know anything at all, you'd better tell me." Darnell felt a surge of frustration. He understood the man's fear, but he wasn't the enemy. "I swear, I don't know where he is, but if he's in trouble, I'll help find him." The two men's eyes met, one filled with worry, the other with determination. For the first time, they seemed to be on the same side. "Let's split up," Darnell suggested. "We'll cover more ground that way." The father hesitated, but then nodded. "Fine, but if you find him first, call me." He handed Darnell his business card before they both went their separate ways. Darnell's mind raced as he scoured every corner of the park, calling out Eli's name. Anxiety clawed at him. He had promised the boy they'd always be friends, that he'd protect him. If anything happened to Eli, he didn't know how he'd live with himself. Just as he was about to lose hope, a faint sound reached his ears. A voice, small and scared. He followed it, his heart pounding, until he found Eli, huddled behind a large bush near the park's edge. Relief washed over him as he knelt beside the boy. "Eli, what are you doing here?" Darnell asked, pulling him into a hug. Eli clung to him, tears streaming down his face. "I got scared. I didn't know where to go." Darnell held him tightly. "It's okay, kid. You're safe now." He pulled out his phone, dialing the number Eli's father had given him. As the phone rang, Darnell felt a wave of emotions: relief, fear, and a fierce determination to make sure Eli was never hurt again. The story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. Darnell's fingers trembled as he held the phone to his ear, waiting for Eli's father to answer. The seconds felt like hours, each ring tightening the knot in his chest. Eli, still clinging to his arm, looked up at him with wide eyes, seeking the reassurance he so desperately needed. "Come on, pick up," Darnell muttered under his breath. Finally, the call connected. "Hello?" Eli's father's voice was sharp, filled with a mixture of fear and frustration. "I found him. He's safe?" Darnell said quickly, relief washing over him as he felt Eli relax at his side. "We're near the edge of the park, by the big oak." There was a pause on the other end, then a sigh that sounded like a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "I'll be right there." The call ended, and Darnell looked down at Eli, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "Your dad's coming, buddy. You're gonna be okay." Eli sniffled, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't know where else to go." Darnell's heart ached at the boy's words. "Hey, don't worry about that. You did the right thing coming here. That's what friends are for." Eli's small smile was like a ray of sunshine breaking through a stormy sky. But before Darnell could say anything more, headlights flashed through the trees. Eli's father, still in his business suit but disheveled, rushed over to them, his eyes full of concern. "Eli," he called, and the boy jumped up, running into his father's arms. The relief on the man's face was palpable as he hugged his son tightly, holding him like he never wanted to let go. Darnell stood back, watching the reunion with a bittersweet smile. He felt a sense of fulfillment, but also an inevitable distance forming. Eli's father looked up, meeting Darnell's gaze. There was no hostility in his eyes this time, just gratitude, and maybe something else. Understanding, perhaps. "Thank you, Darnell," he said, his voice softer than it had ever been. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found him." Darnell nodded, his expression calm, though inside he felt the emotions churning. "Just glad he's safe. That's what matters." Eli's father hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'm sorry for how I treated you before. I didn't understand." There was a weight to his words, an unspoken apology for the assumptions he had made. Darnell shook his hand, feeling a flicker of hope that maybe things could change. We all just want to protect the people we care about. As the two men stood there, an awkward silence settled between them, broken only by Eli's voice. "Dad, can Darnell come home with us tonight? He doesn't have anywhere else to go." The question hung in the air, and Darnell's heart sank. He knew what the answer would likely be. This was a line people like Eli's father didn't cross. A world that wouldn't welcome someone like him, no matter what he had done. But to his surprise, Eli's father didn't immediately say no. He crouched down, looking into Eli's eyes. "Eli, it's late, and Darnell has his own life." "But," he glanced back at Darnell, something like a decision forming in his eyes. "How about we take him for dinner first?" Eli's face lit up, and Darnell felt his own surprise morph into a hesitant smile. "That sounds good," Darnell said, unsure of where this new development would lead but willing to take a step forward. The three of them walked together to the parking lot, the night air cool against their faces. As they approached the sleek black car, Darnell hesitated. feeling the distance between his worn-out boots and the polished vehicle. Eli's father seemed to notice and gave him a nod. "It's just dinner, Darnell. Hop in." The drive was quiet, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Darnell felt out of place in the plush leather seat, but Eli's cheerful chatter from the back seat made the atmosphere lighter. He talked about everything from school to the latest superhero movie he'd seen, and for a moment, it felt like they were just another family on a simple outing. Eli's father pulled up to a small diner, one with warm lights and the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the doors. Darnell hadn't been in a place like this in years, and as he stepped inside, memories of simpler times flooded back. The clink of cutlery, the chatter of families, and the soft music playing in the background, all of it felt like a distant memory. They sat at a booth near the window, and Eli slid in beside Darnell, grinning up at him. "This is my favorite place. They have the best fries." Darnell chuckled, feeling a bit of the tension ease. "I'll take your word for it." As they waited for their food, Eli's father finally spoke, his tone more open than before. "Eli talks about you a lot, you know?" Darnell glanced at Eli, who was busy coloring a kid's menu with a focus that only children could muster. "He's a good kid." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's been through a lot since his mother passed. It's just been the two of us, and sometimes it feels like I'm failing him." Darnell's eyes softened. He understood the weight of regret, the feeling that, no matter what you did, it wasn't enough. "You're doing your best. That's all anyone can ask." The man looked at him, and there was a vulnerability in his eyes. "I appreciate that." He paused, then added, "I know you've been a good friend to him. I was wrong to judge you." Darnell shrugged, trying to brush it off, but the warmth in his chest was undeniable. "It's easy to make assumptions. We all do it." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Eli's favorite classes, funny stories from the park, and even some playful banter about the best superhero movies. As they laughed and shared stories, Darnell felt, for the first time in a long while, like he belonged. But as they finished up their meal and stepped back outside, reality settled back in. The night air was cold, and Darnell felt the chill seep through his thin coat. Eli's father handed him a small to-go bag filled with leftovers. "Here, for later." Darnell accepted it, grateful but also knowing this was where their worlds diverged again. "Thanks for dinner. I appreciate it." Before he could turn away, Eli tugged at his sleeve. "You'll still come to the park, right?" Darnell knelt down, looking Eli in the eyes. "As long as you want me there, kid, I'll be there." Eli's father watched the exchange, something unreadable in his expression. "We should go, Eli, it's late." Eli hugged Darnell one last time before climbing into the car. As Darnell watched them drive away, a sense of hope flickered within him. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for him in Eli's life, even if it was just as a friend. The next few weeks brought a series of unexpected changes. Eli and his father showed up at the park more often, sometimes with a picnic, or just to spend time. Slowly, Darnell felt his presence becoming more accepted. Eli's father, whose name he learned was Marcus, began to share more about his life. His struggles with balancing work and raising Eli, his own grief after his wife's death, and the guilt he felt for being absent so often. One day, as the three of them sat under the old oak tree, Darnell noticed a spark of playfulness in Eli's eyes. "I bet you can't beat me in a race, Darnell." Darnell laughed. "Oh, is that a challenge?" Eli nodded, already getting into position. Marcus shook his head with a grin. "Go easy on the old man, Eli." As they lined up, Darnell felt a surge of joy he hadn't felt in years. On Marcus's signal, they took off, Eli's laughter filling the air. Darnell pretended to stumble, making Eli laugh even harder as he crossed the finish line. But as they collapsed onto the grass, panting and grinning, a thought crossed Darnell's mind, a thought that filled him with both excitement and fear. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had something to lose. The bond between Darnell, Eli, and Marcus continued to grow, weaving a tapestry of connection that felt both unexpected and profoundly meaningful. Darnell found himself increasingly invested in their lives. He was no longer the lone figure beneath the oak tree, watching life pass by. He was part of something, and that feeling both lifted him up and terrified him. He knew from experience how easily good things could be taken away, but for now, He allowed himself to savor every moment. One chilly afternoon, as Darnell approached the familiar park, he noticed Marcus and Eli waiting near the swings. Eli's face was lit with excitement, but Marcus's expression was serious, almost anxious. Darnell's heart sank. Was this the end of their growing friendship? Had Marcus decided to draw that invisible line between their worlds again? "Hey, Darnell." Eli waved enthusiastically, running up to greet him. Darnell gave him a warm smile, but his eyes flicked to Marcus, who seemed deep in thought. "Good to see you, kid," Darnell said, ruffling Eli's hair. "What's going on?" Marcus stepped forward, hands in his pockets, and cleared his throat. "Darnell, I've been thinking. Eli's birthday is coming up, and he's been asking if you could come to the party." Darnell blinked, stunned. "A party?" "Yeah." Eli jumped in, his excitement palpable. "Dad said we could have it at the park, and there'll be cake and games. You have to come." Darnell's chest tightened with emotion. The idea of being invited, of being part of something so joyful and ordinary, was more than he could have hoped for. "I'd be honored, Eli," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. Marcus smiled, but there was still a hint of concern in his eyes. "I want you to be there too, Darnell. But I also wanted to talk to you first." He gestured for Darnell to walk with him, leaving Eli to play on the swings. As they walked along the park's path, Marcus's tone shifted. "I won't lie, I'm still a little cautious. Eli means everything to me, and I've made it my mission to protect him, especially after his mother passed." Darnell nodded, his heart heavy. "I understand, Marcus. I'd never want to put him in harm's way." "I know," Marcus replied, his eyes meeting Darnell's. "And I've seen how good you've been to him. But I need to know more about you, Darnell. I know you've had a tough past, and I don't want to pry, but I need to understand who you really are." Darnell felt his pulse quicken. He had always avoided talking about his past. It was a place of pain, shame, and regret. But as he looked at Marcus, he saw a father who was trying to do right by his son, and he felt the need to be honest. "Look, I wasn't always this way," Darnell began, his voice low and steady. "I had a life, a decent job, a good home, but I made some mistakes. I got mixed up with the wrong people, lost my way, and ended up with nothing." He paused, the memories flashing before his eyes. "I tried to fix things, but sometimes when you fall, it's hard to climb back up. I lost my home, my family, everything. This park, this tree, it became my only constant." Marcus listened intently, his expression unreadable. "I appreciate you sharing that, Darnell. I can't imagine how hard it must have been." He took a deep breath before adding, "But I've also seen how much you care for Eli. And that means something." Darnell felt a wave of relief but also vulnerability. He had opened up a part of himself he usually kept hidden, and the acceptance in Marcus's eyes was more than he had expected. "Thank you, Marcus. It means a lot to me that you trust me." Marcus's serious expression softened into a smile. "Eli's lucky to have you as a friend, and so am I." The words hit Darnell like a warm wave, filling a void he hadn't realized was there. For the first time in years, he felt like he was more than just a drifter. He was a part of something real. On the day of Eli's birthday, the park was filled with the sound of children's laughter and the smell of grilled hot dogs. Bright balloons decorated the benches, and a picnic table was covered with colorful plates and a cake topped with tiny superhero figures. Darnell arrived early, feeling the excitement in the air, but also a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. Eli spotted him and sprinted over, his face alight with joy. "Darnell, you made it. Come on, we're playing tag." Darnell laughed, letting Eli pull him into the fun. They chased each other around the playground, Darnell playfully stumbling and letting the kids tag him out, much to their delight. Marcus watched from a distance, his eyes warm with approval as he saw how naturally Darnell fit into the celebration. As the party went on, Darnell found himself laughing, running, and even dancing as Marcus put on some music. The parents who had been cautious of him at first gradually warmed up, seeing the way he interacted with the children and how much Eli adored him. For the first time, Darnell felt truly accepted. But then, as they gathered around the table to sing happy birthday and cut the cake, an unexpected voice rang out from the park entrance. Well, look who's playing house." Darnell's body tensed as he turned to see a familiar figure, Dwayne, an old friend from his past, someone he hadn't seen in years. Dwayne's eyes gleamed with a mix of amusement and malice. He was dressed in ragged clothes, his face hardened by years of street life. "Didn't expect to see you here, man." Marcus's smile faded as he looked between Darnell and Dwayne. "Is everything all right?" Darnell swallowed, feeling the joy of the day slip away like sand through his fingers. "Yeah, it's fine." But Darnell knew it wasn't fine. Dwayne represented a part of his life he had tried to leave behind, a part that threatened to unravel everything he had built with Eli and Marcus. Dwayne sauntered closer, a mocking grin on his face. "Didn't know you were babysitting these days, Darnell. Thought you'd still be running with the old crew." Eli, sensing the tension, tugged at Darnell's sleeve. "Who is that?" Darnell forced a smile, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just an old friend, Eli. Why don't you go help your dad with the cake?" Eli hesitated but eventually ran off to Marcus, leaving Darnell alone with Dwayne. "What do you want, Dwayne?" Dwayne's grin faded, replaced by a look of annoyance. "Just passing through, but some of us could use a little help. Thought maybe you'd be willing to share since you're living it up now." Darnell felt a surge of anger. "I'm not part of that life anymore, Dwayne. I've moved on." Dwayne's eyes narrowed, and he leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper. "You think you can just walk away? We all got debts, Darnell. Don't forget that." For a moment, the fear gripped Darnell, the old instincts kicking in. But then he glanced over at Eli and Marcus, who were laughing as they handed out cake to the kids. He had something to fight for now, something worth standing his ground for. "You need to leave, Dwayne," Darnell said, his voice firm. "I've got nothing to give you, and I'm not going back to that life." Dwayne's expression darkened, but he gave a mocking salute before turning away. "Suit yourself, man, but don't think you can hide forever." With that, he disappeared into the park's shadows. As Darnell walked back to the group, Marcus caught his eye, concern etched on his face. "Everything okay?" Darnell forced a smile, not wanting to ruin the day. "Yeah, just someone I used to know. Nothing to worry about." Marcus's eyes lingered on him, but he nodded, trusting Darnell's word. "Well, come on. Eli's waiting for you to have some cake." Darnell joined the group, his heart still pounding. But as he looked at Eli's bright smile and the warmth in Marcus's eyes, he felt the fear begin to fade. He wasn't alone anymore, and he wasn't the same man he used to be. But deep down, he knew his past wasn't done with him yet. As Darnell sat with Eli and Marcus, savoring the sweetness of the cake and the laughter that filled the air, he couldn't fully shake off the unease that Dwayne's appearance had stirred up. For the first time in years, he had a sense of belonging, a glimpse of hope that his life could be more than just surviving each day. But Dwayne's words hung over him like a dark cloud, a reminder that the past he had tried to bury wasn't as distant as he had hoped. The party eventually wound down, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus offered Darnell a ride home. "Let us drop you off," Marcus said, noticing Darnell's hesitation. "It's the least we can do, after everything you've done for us." Darnell hesitated. He usually preferred the walk, using the quiet time to gather his thoughts. But tonight, something compelled him to accept. He climbed into the car beside Eli, who was chattering excitedly about his birthday presents and the games they had played. Darnell listened, the warmth of Eli's voice soothing some of the tension that had built up inside him. As they drove through the quiet streets, Marcus glanced over at Darnell. "You're always welcome with us, Darnell," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "It's not just Eli who considers you family." The words struck Darnell deeply, and he struggled to hold back his emotions. For so long, he had been a lone figure, forgotten by the world. But here was Marcus, offering him a place in their lives, treating him not as an outsider, but as someone who mattered. Darnell managed a quiet, "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." The warmth of the moment was suddenly interrupted by the glare of headlights in the rearview mirror. A dark car was following them, its engine rumbling menacingly. Darnell's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the car. It was Dwayne. He felt his pulse quicken, a chill running down his spine. Marcus noticed Darnell's sudden tension and glanced at him. "Something wrong?" Darnell swallowed, forcing himself to stay calm. "Just keep driving, don't stop." But Dwayne's car accelerated, pulling up beside them as they approached a deserted stretch of road. Darnell knew this was no coincidence. Dwayne had found him, and he wasn't about to let him go without a confrontation. Eli, sensing the tension, looked up at Darnell with wide, worried eyes. "Who is that?" Eli whispered, clutching Darnell's arm. Darnell put a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder, though his own fear was barely contained. "It's just someone I used to know, Eli. Don't worry." Dwayne's car swerved suddenly, forcing Marcus to brake. Marcus's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel, his eyes darting between Darnell and the car beside them. "Darnell, what's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Darnell made a decision he had avoided for too long. "Pull over, Marcus. I need to deal with this." Marcus looked at him, uncertainty clouding his face, but he nodded, guiding the car to a stop by the side of the road. Darnell gently pried Eli's hand from his arm, giving him a reassuring smile. "Stay here, okay? I'll be right back." Stepping out of the car, Darnell approached Dwayne's vehicle, which had also stopped. Dwayne climbed out, his posture relaxed but his eyes cold and calculating. The smirk on his face made Darnell's blood boil. "Didn't think you'd make it this easy for me," Dwayne said, his tone mocking. "You got real cozy, huh? Nice car, a little family act. You're moving up in the world, Darnell." "Cut the games, Dwayne," Darnell replied, his voice steady but his fists clenched. "What do you want?" Dwayne's expression hardened. "You owe us, and you don't get to walk away clean just because you found yourself a shiny new life." "I don't owe you anything," Darnell shot back, the anger flaring in his voice. "I've paid for my mistakes 1,000 times over. I'm done with that life." Dwayne's laughter was harsh, echoing in the quiet night. "That's where you're wrong. You don't get to choose when it's over. You're coming with me, or your little family over there might have an unfortunate accident." Darnell felt his heart race, his mind spinning. He glanced back at the car, where Marcus and Eli were watching, their faces a mix of fear and confusion. The thought of them being dragged into his past, of losing this fragile peace he had found, was unbearable. Taking a steadying breath, Darnell made a choice. "If I come with you, you leave them out of this. No more threats. You get what you want, and they walk away unharmed." Dwayne tilted his head, considering the offer. "Fine, but let's get one thing straight. You don't call the shots. You do what I say, when I say it. Got it?" Darnell nodded, feeling a weight settle over him. But as he looked back at the car one last time, he caught Eli's gaze. The boy's eyes filled with worry and trust. He forced a small smile, hoping it would reassure him, though his own heart was breaking. Without another word, he turned back to Dwayne's car, climbing into the passenger seat. Dwayne's smirk was triumphant, but Darnell refused to let it weaken his resolve. He had made his choice, and he would do whatever it took to protect Eli and Marcus, even if it meant facing the darkness of his past alone. As the car pulled away, Darnell looked out the window, watching Marcus and Eli grow smaller in the distance. He closed his eyes, a single thought repeating in his mind like a prayer. "Stay safe, Eli. Stay safe." The following days were a blur for Marcus and Eli. Darnell was gone, his absence a hollow ache they couldn't ignore. Eli asked about him constantly, and Marcus struggled to find answers, feeling helpless and guilty. He had seen the look in Darnell's eyes before he left, a look of resignation, of sacrifice, and it haunted him. One evening, after days of silence, Marcus made a decision. He wasn't going to let Darnell face whatever he was up against alone. He owed Darnell that much, and more importantly, he couldn't bear to see Eli's heartbroken expression every time he asked if Darnell was coming back. With a few discreet inquiries, Marcus managed to track down some information on Dwayne and his connections. It wasn't easy, and it required him to call in some favors, but he was determined. The trail led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place notorious for shady dealings. He parked his car a distance away, keeping Eli close beside him. "Stay here, Eli. I need to talk to someone inside," he said firmly. But Eli's eyes were fierce. "Dad, I'm not leaving. Darnell's our friend. I want to help." Seeing the determination in his son's eyes, Marcus hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay close, and if anything happens, you run and call for help, understand?" Eli nodded, and together, they made their way toward the warehouse, hearts pounding. As they crept closer, they could hear voices inside, Darnell's voice among them. Marcus strained to listen, his fists clenched as he heard Dwayne's mocking laughter. "What's the matter, Darnell?" Dwayne sneered. "Miss your little family?" You should have thought about that before you decided to walk away. Darnell's response was defiant, but Marcus could hear the strain in his voice. You don't scare me, Dwayne. I've dealt with worse than you. Eli's grip on his father's hand tightened, his eyes wide with fear and determination. Marcus knew they couldn't wait any longer. He stepped forward, pushing open the door, his voice ringing out with a force he didn't know he possessed. Let him go, Dwayne. The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at Marcus and Eli, standing in the doorway. Darnell's face was a mixture of shock and relief, while Dwayne's smirk turned into a scowl. Well, isn't this a surprise? Dwayne sneered. The family man himself coming to save the day. Marcus stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. Darnell doesn't owe you anything, and if you lay a hand on him or anyone else, you'll have to answer to me. Dwayne chuckled, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. You think you can just walk in here and make demands? Marcus's voice was calm but firm. Yes, because I have something you don't, a family worth fighting for, and if you threaten that, I will fight you with everything I have. Dwayne's bravado faltered, but he tried to hold his ground. You're making a big mistake. But before he could make another move, Eli stepped forward, his small voice cutting through the tension. Darnell's our friend, and friends protect each other. The innocence and strength in Eli's words struck everyone in the room, even Dwayne. He looked at the boy, then back at Darnell, something flickering in his eyes, perhaps a realization that he had already lost the battle. With a frustrated growl, Dwayne took a step back, signaling for his men to follow him. Fine, you want him? Take him. But don't think this is over. As Dwayne and his men disappeared into the shadows, Darnell slumped with relief, a smile breaking across his face as he looked at Marcus and Eli. You didn't have to do this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Marcus placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Yes, I did. Family sticks together, Darnell, and you're part of ours. Eli rushed forward, hugging Darnell tightly. Don't ever leave again, he whispered. Darnell hugged him back, his heart full, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, he was no longer facing it alone. Darnell, Marcus, and Eli returned home together, the air still thick with the intensity of the confrontation they had just walked away from. Each of them carried a quiet relief, but there was also an unspoken tension, an acknowledgement that while they had faced down a threat, the dangers were not entirely gone. The next few days were a delicate balance. Darnell felt a sense of gratitude and closeness he hadn't known in years. Marcus welcomed him into their home more often, and Eli's excitement at having Darnell around was impossible to ignore. He was becoming a true part of their lives, not just a visitor at the park, but a steady, comforting presence in their home. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Eli looked up from his plate, his face thoughtful. Darnell, you don't have to go back to the park, right? You can stay here, can't he, Dad? Darnell looked up, caught off guard by Eli's directness. He glanced at Marcus, unsure of what to say. Marcus met Darnell's gaze, his own expression thoughtful. Actually, Eli has a point, he said slowly. I know things haven't been easy, and we've all been through a lot together. Maybe it's time you had a place of your own, Darnell. Somewhere safer, where you can truly start over. Darnell felt a wave of emotion surge within him. Having a place to call his own was something he hadn't dared to imagine for years. He had accepted his life in the park as a permanent state, one he'd learned to survive in. But now, looking at Marcus and Eli, he felt the glimmer of hope, of possibility. I wouldn't want to impose, he stammered, feeling overwhelmed by the offer. Impose? Marcus chuckled softly, leaning back in his chair. Darnell, if anything, you've made our lives better. You've been a friend to Eli when he needed it most, and you've shown us the kind of strength that I think we all needed to see. I've got an extra room in the basement. It's not much, but it's warm and it's safe. Eli's face lit up with excitement. Please, Darnell, it'll be like a sleepover every night. Darnell's laughter was soft but genuine, the sound unfamiliar even to his own ears. All right, kid, if it's okay with your dad, I'd love to stay for a while. Over the following days, Marcus and Eli helped Darnell move what few belongings he had into their home. They transformed the basement into a cozy space, filling it with new bedding, a small desk, and even a few potted plants that Eli insisted would make the room feel like home. With each passing day, Darnell grew more comfortable, and their bond deepened. For Marcus, having Darnell around wasn't just about helping a friend. It was about filling the void left by his late wife and giving Eli the sense of family he had so desperately needed. And for Darnell, each new day was a testament to second chances, an opportunity to build a life he had once thought impossible. As the weeks went by, Darnell found himself adjusting to his new life. He helped out around the house, repaired small things Marcus hadn't had time to fix, and even picked Eli up from school when Marcus had late meetings. The neighborhood began to accept him as part of the family, and slowly, the shadows of his past seemed to fade. But one evening, as Darnell was finishing up dishes in the kitchen, there was a sudden, heavy knock on the door. Marcus and Eli looked up, exchanging worried glances. Darnell's heart sank. He recognized that knock, a sound that belonged to a world he thought he had left behind. Marcus opened the door cautiously, revealing two police officers standing on the porch, their expressions serious. "We're looking for Darnell James," one of them said, his tone neutral but firm. Darnell stepped forward, his heart pounding. "That's me. What's this about, officer?" The officer studied him, his face impassive. "We've been informed that you may have ties to some unresolved issues connected to certain individuals in this area. We're just here to ask a few questions." Marcus's face hardened, and he stepped protectively in front of Darnell. If this is about those people from Darnell's past, he has nothing to do with them anymore. The officer sighed. "We're aware of that, sir, but it seems that one of these individuals has decided to implicate Mr. James in a series of recent incidents. We're here to clarify things, that's all." Darnell felt his stomach twist. He knew this was Dwayne's doing, an attempt to drag him back into the life he'd fought so hard to escape. Marcus's voice was calm but resolute. "Darnell is a part of our family now. If you want to ask questions, then I'll be present, and he won't be going anywhere without legal representation." The officers exchanged a look, clearly taken aback by Marcus's insistence. "Very well," one of them replied. "We'll conduct our inquiries here." Darnell felt a surge of gratitude as Marcus sat beside him, his support unwavering. Eli watched from the hallway, worry evident in his young eyes. The officers asked Darnell questions, pressing for details about his past, about any recent interactions he might have had with individuals like Dwayne. Darnell answered honestly, explaining that he had left that life behind and had no intention of returning. When the officers finally left, they issued a final warning. "Mr. James, we recommend you stay out of trouble. If these individuals contact you again, inform us immediately." After they had gone, the tension in the room remained thick. Darnell looked at Marcus, guilt flickering in his eyes. "I'm sorry for bringing this into your home. I thought I could leave it all behind." Marcus shook his head. "Darnell, you don't have to apologize. We're in this together. I told you, family sticks together." Eli came forward, throwing his arms around Darnell in a hug that seemed too big for his small frame. "We're not letting you go, Darnell. You're part of our family now. Right, Dad?" Marcus nodded, his hand resting firmly on Darnell's shoulder. "Right." The incident with the police only deepened their bond, and in the days that followed, Marcus took steps to ensure that Darnell's situation was secure. He reached out to a lawyer, a friend from college who offered to help Darnell clear up any lingering issues with the authorities. As they worked to formally distance Darnell from the shadows of his past, Marcus continued to show unwavering support, reinforcing to Darnell that he was no longer alone. One quiet evening, as Darnell and Marcus sat on the porch, watching Eli chase fireflies in the yard, Marcus turned to him with a thoughtful look. "You know, Darnell, I don't think I ever properly thanked you." Darnell glanced at him, confused. "For what?" "For being here for Eli, for helping me see things differently." Marcus paused, his gaze shifting to Eli as he laughed, chasing the flickering lights in the dusk. "After my wife passed, I thought I could handle everything alone. But you've shown me that it's okay to let others in, to lean on people when you need it." Darnell felt a lump in his throat. "Marcus, I don't think you realize how much you and Eli have given me. You've given me a chance, a family." They sat in comfortable silence, each man lost in his thoughts, but united in an unspoken understanding. As they watched Eli, their worries seemed to fade, replaced by a quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, things could stay this way. But as they returned to the warmth of the house, a shadow moved across the street. Dwayne, hidden in the darkness, watched them through narrowed eyes. His face twisted with resentment as he watched Darnell, comfortable in his new life, a life that should have been impossible for a man like him. Dwayne's fists clenched and his jaw tightened. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The next chapter of Darnell's life was about to face its greatest test. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle into a steady rhythm for Darnell, Marcus, and Eli. The shadows of Darnell's past seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the warmth and security of a new life. Darnell began to feel truly at home, finding joy in the small, everyday routines that he had once taken for granted. But one evening, as Darnell walked home from a late shift at a nearby mechanic's shop Marcus had helped him find, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the house. His heart sank. Recognizing the silhouette immediately, it was Dwayne. Dwayne's eyes glinted with a mix of anger and amusement as he watched Darnell approach. "Didn't think you'd be so easy to find, Darnell," he said, stepping forward with a smirk. "Look at you, all domesticated. How's it feel to be playing house?" Darnell clenched his fists, his mind racing. "What do you want, Dwayne? I told you I'm done with that life." "Did you really think you could just walk away?" Dwayne sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "You've got a cozy setup here, don't you? But I know things about you, Darnell. Things that could ruin this little fantasy life you've got going." Darnell's mind flashed with images of Marcus and Eli, of the peace they had built together. The idea of Dwayne disrupting their lives filled him with dread, but he knew he couldn't show fear. "If you've come here to make threats, you're wasting your time," Darnell replied, his voice steady. "I have nothing left to give you." "Oh, I don't want your money," Dwayne said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What I want is to remind you that people like us don't get to have happy endings. You walk around here acting like you're one of them, but you're not, and you never will be." Darnell's fists unclenched as he straightened, refusing to let Dwayne's words shake him. "You're wrong. People can change, and I have changed." Dwayne's smirk faded, replaced by a dark glare. "We'll see how long that lasts," he muttered before turning away. Disappearing into the shadows, Darnell watched him go, a mixture of relief and worry tightening in his chest. He had stood his ground, but he knew Dwayne wasn't gone for good. His threat hung in the air, a dark reminder that Darnell's past was never far behind. When he walked inside, Marcus was waiting for him, having heard part of the exchange. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his face etched with concern. Darnell sighed, feeling the weight of honesty pressing down on him. "It was Dwayne," he admitted. "He's trying to scare me, to make me feel like I don't deserve this life." Marcus's expression darkened. "If he comes back, we'll go to the police. You have a right to live in peace, Darnell. You've earned it." Darnell shook his head, a weary smile on his face. "The police can only do so much. People like Dwayne don't back down easily." Eli, who had overheard the conversation from the hallway, ran over and hugged Darnell tightly. "Don't worry, Darnell. We're not going to let anyone take you away from us." The warmth of Eli's embrace steadied Darnell, reminding him of what he was fighting for. He hugged Eli back, a fierce protectiveness settling over him. "Thank you, Eli. I'm not going anywhere." Despite Darnell's determination, the days that followed were tense. He found himself looking over his shoulder, half expecting Dwayne to show up at any moment. He confided in Marcus, and together they took precautions, making sure the doors were locked at night, setting up additional lights around the house, and talking with the neighbors about potential strangers. One evening, just as Darnell was beginning to think the worst was over, a knock came at the door. Marcus answered it, and to his shock, he found Dwayne standing there, a smug look on his face. Behind him were two men with hardened expressions, clearly there to back him up. "Good evening," Dwayne said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "I just came by to chat with my old friend." Marcus's face hardened. "Whatever you need to say to Darnell, you can say with us here. You're not welcome." Dwayne's smile faded and his gaze turned cold. "Fine," he said, his tone clipped. "I'm here to remind Darnell that he owes me. He walked away from the life we had without paying his dues, and I'm here to collect." Darnell stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with a quiet resolve. "I don't owe you anything, Dwayne. Whatever debts I had, I paid a long time ago. Dwayne laughed bitterly. You really believe that, don't you? He glanced around the cozy house, taking in the signs of family life, the warmth and safety that he knew Darnell had found here. I'll make you a deal, Darnell. If you want me to leave, then come back with us. No trouble, no police. Just you and me, like old times. Eli's voice broke through the tension, his tone filled with fear and defiance. No, Darnell's staying with us. He's not going anywhere with you. Dwayne's eyes narrowed as he looked at Eli, a twisted grin spreading across his face. Isn't this cute? Look at your little family, Darnell. But families, well, they have a way of falling apart, don't they? Marcus stepped forward, his tone sharp and unwavering. You're not scaring anyone, Dwayne. This is your last warning. Leave, or I call the police. Dwayne's smirk faltered for a brief moment before he forced it back. Fine, but this isn't over, he sneered, turning to leave. His gaze lingered on Darnell, a dark promise in his eyes. I'll be seeing you, Darnell. As the door closed behind him, Darnell felt a wave of relief, but he knew it was temporary. Dwayne wouldn't give up so easily, and it was only a matter of time before he tried something else. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. We'll get through this together, he said firmly. Darnell nodded, a new determination settling over him. He wasn't alone in this fight, and he had a family that believed in him. No matter what Dwayne tried, he wouldn't let him tear them apart. In the following days, Marcus made arrangements to ensure Darnell's safety, reaching out to old contacts and gathering information on Dwayne's whereabouts. They set up additional security around the house, and Marcus even enrolled Eli in a self-defense class, explaining to him that it was just a precaution. One night, after they had tucked Eli in, Marcus and Darnell sat in the living room, going over their plans. Marcus handed Darnell a small slip of paper, his face serious. I've spoken to a friend who works in law enforcement. He thinks it might be possible to get a restraining order against Dwayne. It won't be easy, but it's worth a try. Darnell looked at the paper, a mixture of relief and anxiety filling him. Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what I'd do without you. Marcus gave him a reassuring smile. You don't have to thank me, Darnell. You're family. The word family hung in the air, filling Darnell with a deep, indescribable warmth. For so long he had been a man adrift, moving through life without any true sense of belonging. But now, sitting here with Marcus, he felt rooted, as if he had finally found his place in the world. The next morning, they filed the restraining order, the paperwork thick with the weight of their efforts to keep Dwayne away. They waited anxiously for news, and in the meantime, life went on. Darnell continued his work at the mechanic's shop, Eli went to school, and Marcus maintained his busy schedule, each of them finding comfort in their routines. But one evening, as they sat down to dinner, the phone rang. Marcus answered, his face growing tense as he listened to the voice on the other end. Yes, I understand. Thank you for letting us know, he said before hanging up, his expression grave. What is it? Darnell asked, his heart pounding. It's Dwayne, Marcus replied quietly. The restraining order has been approved. But they've warned us. He's gone underground, and they don't know where he is. A chill ran down Darnell's spine. The restraining order was in place, but the threat hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved to the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Darnell glanced at Marcus and Eli, a surge of protectiveness filling him. No matter where Dwayne was, or what he might try, Darnell knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to protect his newfound family. And as they sat together, each of them sharing in the unspoken vow of loyalty and love, Darnell felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man running from his past. He was a man ready to face whatever challenges came his way, driven by a love that was stronger than fear. The tension in the house was like a silent storm, brewing just below the surface. Though life went on as usual, Darnell, Marcus, and Eli felt the strain of knowing Dwayne was out there, somewhere, lurking in the shadows. They had secured the restraining order, but Darnell knew better than anyone that paper alone wouldn't stop a man like Dwayne. It was a comfort to know that Marcus and Eli believed in him, but it was also a burden. Darnell couldn't help feeling that his past had thrown them all into danger. One quiet Saturday afternoon, they decided to go on a family outing to the beach. They needed a break from the heaviness that had settled over their lives, and Darnell had always loved the sea. He remembered how, as a child, he would visit the shore with his own mother, marveling at the endless horizon and the vast, open sky. He wanted to share that with Eli. As they walked along the sand, Eli ran ahead, collecting seashells and laughing as the waves splashed at his feet. Marcus and Darnell walked behind, watching him with quiet smiles. "He's a good kid," Darnell said, his voice full of admiration. Marcus nodded, his gaze never leaving Eli. "He thinks the world of you, you know? I don't think he's ever had a friend quite like you." Darnell smiled, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. "I just wish he didn't have to go through all of this. I hate that my past has put him in danger." Marcus stopped, placing a hand on Darnell's shoulder. "You can't control where you came from, Darnell. All that matters is who you are now. And now you're part of this family. We're in this together." Darnell nodded, feeling the weight of Marcus's words settle over him like a protective shield. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe he deserved this second chance, that maybe he could hold on to the peace they had built together. But as the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the waves, Darnell noticed a figure standing on the edge of the beach, watching them. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized Dwayne, his silhouette sharp and menacing against the horizon. Darnell's body went tense, instincts firing, but he forced himself to stay calm, not wanting to alarm Marcus or Eli. Marcus followed Darnell's gaze, his jaw clenching as he saw Dwayne. "What's he doing here?" "Nothing good?" Darnell replied, his voice low. "He's trying to remind me that he's still in control, that he can get to me whenever he wants." Eli, sensing the sudden tension, looked up from his collection of seashells and followed their line of sight. "Is that?" Darnell crouched down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Hey buddy, why don't you go grab a few more shells? We'll catch up with you in a minute." Eli hesitated, his young eyes full of worry, but he nodded and trotted off down the beach. Darnell straightened, his eyes never leaving Dwayne. Marcus stepped forward, his face a mixture of frustration and anger. "We can't let him keep doing this, Darnell. He's crossing a line." "I know," Darnell replied, his voice grim. "But he wants me to react. If I go after him now, he'll use it against me, drag me back into his world." Marcus clenched his fists, struggling to keep his own temper in check. "So what do we do?" Darnell took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We wait. Let him see that he can't scare us. He'll either get tired and leave, or he'll make a mistake." But as they turned to head back to Eli, Dwayne called out, his voice echoing across the beach. "Darnell, you're really gonna keep playing house? Don't forget where you came from, man." Darnell forced himself not to respond, but Marcus turned, his voice filled with calm defiance. "Whatever Darnell's past was, it doesn't define him. And you're not welcome here." Dwayne laughed, a harsh sound that carried over the crashing waves. "We'll see about that," he said before disappearing down the beach, his figure swallowed by the fading light. They returned to Eli, who was waiting anxiously, his small face pale with worry. "Is everything okay?" Darnell knelt beside him, his voice steady and warm. "Yeah, buddy, everything's fine. Let's finish gathering those shells, all right?" Eli nodded, though the tension in his young eyes remained. As they continued their day at the beach, Darnell felt a new resolve building within him. Dwayne wasn't going to disappear, and the threat he posed was real. But this time, Darnell wasn't facing it alone. That night, back at home, Marcus called a family meeting in the living room. They all sat together, the seriousness of the moment pressing down on them. "Darnell," Marcus began, his tone steady, "I think it's time we take the next step. We need to find a way to protect ourselves. I know you don't want trouble, but we can't keep letting him control our lives." Darnell nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I agree, but we need a plan, one that doesn't put Eli in harm's way." Eli, listening intently, raised his hand as if he were in school. "I want to help too. Darnell's my friend, and I don't want him to leave." Darnell chuckled, touched by Eli's loyalty. "I appreciate that, buddy, but this is something you don't need to worry about." Marcus glanced at Darnell, a determined look in his eyes. "Actually, I think Eli's right. We're all in this together, so here's what we're going to do." They spent the evening discussing their options, devising a plan to protect their home and ensure that Dwayne had no way of getting to them. Marcus called in more friends, connections he had made over the years, asking for advice and support. They installed security cameras around the property, made sure to keep emergency contacts on hand, and set up a safe room for Eli in case things ever got out of hand. For the first time, Darnell felt that he had people fighting alongside him. People who truly believed in him and were willing to stand by him, no matter the risks. It was both humbling and empowering. But Dwayne's shadow loomed closer. Days later, Darnell received a message on his phone, a photo of Marcus, Eli, and himself at the beach, with the caption, "Nice family day out. Would be a shame if something happened." Darnell's blood ran cold. He knew this was more than just a threat. Dwayne was toying with them, trying to push him to the breaking point. Without thinking, he showed the photo to Marcus, whose face hardened with anger. "That's it," Marcus said, his voice low. "We're going to the police." They took the message and the photo to the authorities, explaining the entire situation. The police took their concerns seriously this time, especially with the restraining order already in place and Dwayne's known criminal history. They assured Marcus and Darnell that they would increase patrols in the neighborhood and keep an eye out for Dwayne, but they warned that he might not be so easy to catch. Eli, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, tried to keep everyone's spirits up, drawing pictures of the family and leaving little notes around the house. Each time Darnell found one, a crayon drawing of them all at the park, a note saying, "Stay safe, Darnell," he felt his resolve strengthen. He would not let Dwayne take this life away from him. As the days went on, Darnell became more vigilant, watching for any sign of Dwayne. But life continued, and slowly, with Marcus and Eli's unwavering support, Darnell began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But as the sun set one evening and the house grew quiet, a loud knock echoed through the front door. Darnell's heart pounded as he glanced at Marcus, who nodded, bracing himself. They had prepared for this. Marcus gestured for Eli to go to his room, assuring him that everything was fine. Then he and Darnell approached the door together, the tension thick between them. As they opened it, they were met not with Dwayne, but with a stranger. A young man, bruised and looking frightened. He looked up at them with wide eyes. "Are you Darnell?" he asked, his voice shaking. Darnell nodded, confused. "Yeah, that's me. Who are you?" The young man took a shaky breath. I was part of Dwayne's crew, but he's lost it, man. He's out of control. He told us he was going to do something to hurt you and your family. I didn't want any part of it. I came to warn you." Darnell and Marcus exchanged a look, their resolve steeling. This was it. The moment they had prepared for, the battle they knew they couldn't avoid. "Thank you for the warning," Darnell said, his voice calm but fierce. "Now let's put an end to this." The revelation from the young man hit like a bolt of lightning. Darnell and Marcus stood silent for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what he had said. Dwayne wasn't just making idle threats anymore. He had set his sights on something dangerous, something that could shatter everything they had built. Darnell took a deep breath, his eyes sharp with determination. "Thank you for coming forward," he told the young man. "I know that couldn't have been easy." The young man nodded, looking nervously at his feet. "Dwayne? He's not like he used to be. He's got nothing to lose now, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to drag you down with him." Marcus glanced at Darnell, and a silent understanding passed between them. They both knew this wasn't just about Darnell's past anymore. It was about their family, about protecting the life they had fought so hard to build. "What can we expect?" Marcus asked, his tone calm, but his eyes blazing with determination. The young man swallowed hard. "Dwayne has been talking about breaking into your place, doing something that would send a clear message. I think he's got a few of the others riled up enough to go along with it. He knows that going through your front door is too risky now, but he might try something indirect. I don't know exactly what, but..." He trailed off, the fear evident in his eyes. Darnell's jaw tightened. "Thanks for the warning," he said. "You've done the right thing." After the young man left, Marcus turned to Darnell. "This is it then," he said quietly. "If Dwayne's willing to go this far, we can't just sit and wait." Darnell nodded, his face set with resolve. "We need to go on the offensive. If he's watching, then let's give him something to see." That night, they set a plan into motion. Marcus called his friend in law enforcement, who agreed to discreetly post officers in unmarked vehicles near their home, ready to step in if Dwayne made any move. Darnell, meanwhile, took charge of setting up additional security measures around the house and training Eli on what to do if he ever felt unsafe. "Don't be afraid, buddy," Darnell told Eli, kneeling to his level. "You're safe here. Just remember everything we've talked about, okay?" Eli nodded, his young face full of trust. "I know you'll protect us, Darnell. You're the bravest person I know." The words filled Darnell with a fierce sense of purpose. Eli's belief in him was a powerful reminder that he had more to fight for now than ever before. As they settled in for the night, the house seemed to hold its breath, every creak and rustle amplified by the tension. The minutes dragged by, each tick of the clock sharpening their anticipation. Then, just past midnight, they heard it. A subtle but unmistakable scraping at one of the back windows. Marcus's eyes met Darnell's, a silent signal passing between them. They had been ready for this. Moving quietly, Marcus sent a quick text to his contact, alerting the officers stationed nearby. Meanwhile, Darnell took up position near the back door, his every nerve taut with focus. The scraping grew louder, then stopped altogether. A faint shadow passed by the window, and Darnell knew that Dwayne, or one of his cronies, was out there testing their defenses. Then, suddenly, the figure outside tried the handle on the back door, the butter pushing against it with a slow, deliberate force. But the door held firm, bolstered by the new lock Marcus had installed that very morning. Outside, a frustrated curse echoed through the night, followed by a low, angry growl. Darnell recognized Dwayne's voice and felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that his plan had been thwarted, at least for now. But then Dwayne's voice grew louder, carrying a sinister tone. "Come on out, Darnell. Hiding behind your little fortress, huh? I thought you were tougher than that." Darnell's fists clenched, but he remained still, resisting the urge to confront Dwayne directly. This was exactly what Dwayne wanted, to provoke him, to make him lash out in a way that could backfire. Marcus stepped up beside Darnell, whispering, "Let the officers handle it. Don't give him what he's looking for." Just as Darnell nodded, the sound of sirens pierced the night, their wails growing closer. Outside, Dwayne's face twisted in anger and disbelief as he realized what was happening. He took a few hurried steps back, glancing around, as two unmarked police cars pulled up, lights flashing. One of the officers stepped out, addressing Dwayne with a calm but authoritative tone. "Mr. Dwayne Turner, you're in violation of a restraining order. I suggest you come quietly." Dwayne laughed, a bitter, defiant sound. "You think I'm afraid of you?" he sneered. But the bravado in his voice wavered, and Darnell could see the fear flicker in his eyes. With a final defiant glare at Darnell, Dwayne backed up, his hands raised in mock surrender. But just as the officers moved in, he bolted, sprinting toward the tree line. The officers pursued, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Inside, Darnell and Marcus watched as the scene unfolded, relief mingling with the tension that still lingered. But Darnell knew this wasn't over yet. Dwayne was like a cornered animal, desperate, dangerous, and unwilling to give up. The hours dragged on, and eventually an officer came to the door, his face grim. "We lost him in the woods," he admitted, a hint of frustration in his voice. "But we'll keep looking. He won't get far." Marcus thanked the officer, and as the patrol cars left, he turned to Darnell, his face weary but resolute. "We knew he wouldn't give up that easily. But we're not giving up either." Darnell nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and determination. Dwayne was still out there, a shadow lurking on the edge of their lives, but they had taken a stand, made it clear that they would not be intimidated. And in that small victory, Darnell found the strength to keep fighting. The days that followed were tense but manageable. The police maintained their presence, conducting regular patrols through the neighborhood, while Darnell and Marcus kept their guard up, watching for any sign of Dwayne. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, Eli spoke up, his young voice filled with quiet wisdom. "Darnell, are you scared of Dwayne?" Darnell looked at him, surprised by the question. He hesitated, then answered honestly, "A little, Eli, but I'm more scared of letting him take away what we have. I'm not going to let that happen." Eli nodded, a determined look on his face. "Good, because you're stronger than he is. I know it." Marcus reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on Darnell's shoulder. Eli's right. You're stronger than any of us, Darnell. We're gonna get through this, together. That night, as they sat around the living room, sharing stories and laughter, Darnell felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. For the first time, he truly believed that he could face whatever challenges lay ahead, that he was not defined by his past, but by the people who believed in him. And somewhere, out there in the darkness, Dwayne watched, simmering with resentment. He had failed to break Darnell, but he wasn't done. His plans had been thwarted, but he knew one thing for sure: the game wasn't over. But as far as Darnell was concerned, this wasn't a game. It was a fight for the life he had chosen, the family he had found, and the peace he was determined to protect. And in that resolve, he knew that whatever Dwayne threw at him, he was ready. As the days slipped by, the tension between peace and peril held them all in its grip. Darnell had begun to settle back into life, but every creak in the night, every shadow outside the window, kept him vigilant. He had built something here: love, family, and a sense of belonging. But he knew that Dwayne wasn't gone, just waiting for the right moment to strike. One evening, as they all sat together watching a movie, the doorbell rang. Marcus and Darnell exchanged a quick glance, their eyes sharpened with caution. Marcus stood, peering through the window cautiously, and then relaxed, smiling. "It's just the mailman," he said, reaching for the door. He returned with a small package addressed to Darnell. Darnell's brow furrowed as he took it, glancing at the label. There was no return address. As he tore the packaging open, a small, unmarked envelope slipped out, along with a single black and white photograph. His heart clenched when he recognized the image. A photo of himself, Marcus, and Eli, standing together at the beach from weeks ago. Darnell opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a note, written in bold, jagged handwriting. "Family looks good on you, Darnell. Enjoy it while it lasts." Darnell felt a chill down his spine. Dwayne was still watching, closer than they ever imagined. Marcus put a steadying hand on Darnell's shoulder as he read the note, his face turning grim. "This means he's not done with us, doesn't it?" he said quietly, his voice laced with a new resolve. Darnell nodded, his eyes hardening. "If he thinks he can scare us off, he's wrong." He glanced at Eli, who was watching them both, his young eyes filled with a mix of worry and trust. Darnell took a deep breath, knowing that protecting them was no longer a matter of simple defense. Dwayne was out there, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. As Darnell and Marcus shared a silent nod of agreement, a sense of determination settled over the room. They had a family to protect, and Darnell would stop at nothing to keep them safe. Outside, a dark figure moved along the street, vanishing into the shadows, watching, waiting.